My name is Luxury. I work as an office clerk at a company. I am a woman in late 20s. After graduated from university, I got a job at current company, and have been working together with male employees. Even though I am not good at showing my opinion, I have been hidden this at workplace. Therefore, I was well liked by my colleagues. However, major turning point occurred. It was when I met my husband. My husband was an employee at the head office of the company I work for, and he was my supervisor. He was 5 years older than me, and a kind person who could get along with everyone. Although we didn't have much interaction for the first few years after I joined the company, we coincidentally met during an employee training session at the head office, and our relationship deepened rapidly from there. We started dating soon after that. Even after we started dating, my husband was kind to me, and always attentive. I had no doubt that I could spend my whole life with this person. Afterwards, he proposed to me, and we got married. Parents-in-law were also kind to me, so I had high expectations for our future life. However, my husband changed after we got married.
Hey! Why is dinner just pre-packaged food?
One day, my husband yelled at me like that. That night's dinner was pre-packaged food from the supermarket, and he seemed displeased with it. I was tired from overwork, and it was not usual to buy pre-packaged food. However, my husband told me,
"You're slacking off as a wife,"
and didn't understand at all.
"I'm sorry. I'll cook properly from tomorrow."
After I deeply bowed my head in apology, my husband clicked his tongue and, trying to express his displeasure, saying,
"I can't eat this. I'm going to bed."
And he left the room. I was upset. Since we got married, my husband had lost the kindness he used to show me. He yelled at me whenever he disappointed my attitude, and he even vented his frustrations from work onto me. I couldn't argue back and always hid my tears. Turns out, I always care about my husband's emotion and tried not to be yelled by him. However, all my efforts were in vain as my husband started hitting and kicking me. One time, since I came back late.
"You, a person like you, how can you come back home later than me?"
My husband yelled at me and stepped on my face. Another time, it was because I hadn't folded laundries. He said,
"You can't even do such a simple thing properly. Useless woman,"
and threw the laundry off the balcony. However, on the days when I came home late, it was because unexpected additional tasks occurred. Since my husband worked at head office, he should know such a thing. But he shouted,
"Don't blame the company. This is because of your inefficiency,"
and didn't even listen to my opinion. We were rather than a husband and wife. I was treated like a servant. And I was tired of this life. 2 years after this unhealthy relationship began, I was struck by severe health problems. I couldn't wake up early in the morning, and I couldn't eat properly.
Are you sick or something? You're so useless."
At first, my husband berated me, but, as I vomited almost every day, he seemed to realize something and asked me,
"Hey, are you pregnant?"
That's when I finally realized that I became pregnant. I hurried to the hospital, and it was confirmed that I was definitely pregnant, and I couldn't help but cry. I returned home, and immediately told my husband,
"I'm pregnant. It's our child,"
I said in a loud voice that I wouldn't normally use, and my husband, with a smile I had never seen before, his eyes sparkling, and replied,
"Really? That's great."
Seeing that his reaction, I felt the anxieties fade away. Although my husband always verbally abused me and engaged in domestic violence, deep down he loves children. Surely, with the birth of our child, the strange relationship between us would end, and my husband might develop a sense of being a father. With that thought in mind, I made up my mind to give birth to our baby. However, being pregnant turned out to be more difficult than I had imagined. At my workplace, the unique smell indoors made me feel nauseous, and just smelling food would make me throw up. It was what is called morning sickness, but my husband wasn't care about me.
Why haven't you prepared dinner? You're just sleeping, living a comfortable life.
He shouted at me while I was sleeping due to morning sickness.
I'm sorry. I can't even open the refrigerator because I feel sick just from the smell.
For response of what I said, my husband clicked his tongue and said,
Do you understand your role as a wife? You're too self-indulgent.
Once again, he insulted at me. I tried to move because my husband looked irritated, but I still felt bad and couldn't bring myself to move. My husband was more and more bothered by me. He started dropping my belongings from the desk to the floor.
Stop it.
I tried to hold back my nausea and stopped my husband, but his didn't cease the action.
Shut up. Pregnancy is not an illness. Don't get it twisted.
He shouted and forcefully pulled my arm. In that moment, I felt intense pain at my stomach, and it made me shudder.
Ouch! Stop!
I cried out, and my husband slapped my cheek.
Don't make a fuss. You're using pregnancy as an excuse and being too spoiled.
I was yelled at and involuntarily flinched. My husband, pleased with himself, wore a smirk on his unpleasant face and grabbed my arm, leading me away. I resisted, but it did not work and forcefully pushed into the car.
Where are we going?
I felt like I was going to vomit from the smell inside the car. However, my husband ignored me, started the engine, and drove off. It was winter at the moment, and I hadn't brought any coat or warm clothing, so I was anxious. Because this coldness would surely have a significant impact on the baby. But I didn't have the courage to say my concerns to my husband. My life was in the hands of the husband driving. I hugged my body, trying to keep warm and endure the cold. After driving for a while, seemed to have arrived somewhere and parked. Then, he got out of the car and forcefully dragged me out of the car.
Ouch!
Whenever I made even a slight sound, he glared at me. For some reason, he was looking at me in a good mood. There is growing apprehension that something bad would happen. I quickly looked around, and everywhere was covered in pure white snow. It was too dark to see clearly, but there was a sign nearby that had the word ski resort written on it. This ski resort, which had been existing since I was a child, but went bankrupt and closed down a few years ago. Why would my husband bring me to a place like this? Thinking about it made me sweat despite the cold. Then, my husband grabbed my arm and started walking towards the abandoned ski resort. I desperately resisted, but his hands kept holding me tight. The pain on my body was getting stronger, and I feared the worst.
My berry has been hurting since earlier. In this freezing place, the baby.
I pleaded desperately to my husband. He did stop momentarily, but his grip on my arm remained strong. My husband looked straight at me and said clearly,
Don't use pregnancy as an excuse and act spoiled. You just die with your child.
With that, he threw me into the piled-up snow and ran away. What was my husband saying? Where did the husband who was so happy about the child go? I looked up at the sky and saw snow falling again. The wind was blowing, creating a blizzard-like condition. Realizing that it was not the time to be pessimistic, I slowly stood up and started walking. I was struggling desperately to resist to the husband at that time, so I don't know how far I was dragged, and due to the blizzard, I couldn't find an exit. At this rate, neither the child nor I might survive. That thought made me terrified, but I kept moving forward. And with my light clothes for this freezing weather, my limbs started to hurt. And eventually, I lost sensation.
Is anyone there? Help me.
I tried raising my voice, but it was eerily quiet around, and I couldn't imagine anyone being there. I was walking forward, but I was overcome by extreme drowsiness. I couldn't even walk anymore, and even I couldn't understand what I was saying during raising the voice. Finally, I collapsed into the freezing snow. What was my life all about, after all? I suddenly had such thoughts. The husband I married, who was a good person, turned out to be a scumbag who only engaged in domestic violence and verbal abuse. For that guy's sake, I devoted my life, without any time for myself, working hard on housework and my job. And yet, that man would come home from work and do nothing, only to verbally abuse me to blow his stress away, and resort to violence.
I will definitely seek revenge.
As my consciousness faded, I had such thoughts. The next time I regained consciousness, I found myself lying on a pure white bed. My body, which had been so chilled, was now warm, and I realized someone saved me.
How are you feeling? Do you know where you are?
A doctor nearby noticed that I had woken up, and spoke to me. At that time, I lost consciousness, in the midst of the snow, but neighbor found me, and called an ambulance. They heard me screaming for help. I felt relieved, but there was a sense of something being off. Somehow, my body felt pretty fine. Normally, I would be suffering from morning sickness, and feeling unwell, but there was none of that at all.
Doctor. Is the baby in my belly okay? Are they fine?
When I asked that, the doctor showed sad face and said,
When we found you, the baby in your belly had already passed away. After all, it's in such extreme cold.
They said. Passed away? Who? My mind couldn't catch up, and brain went blank, but tears started flowing uncontrollably. Was it because I couldn't endure in that snow, or was it when I was dragged by my husband? Either way, it doesn't matter anymore. My husband is no longer someone I should devote myself to. At that moment, in the freezing ski resort, I made a vow. That's why I resolved to have the revenge against that scumbag husband, who took away my precious child. Even if I say revenge, there's not much I can do to my husband. Whatever I do, I wanted someone else who would help me. So I made a phone call to a certain person.
Hello, long time no see.
The person I called was my older brother. My brother is the same age as my husband, and just after the marriage, I saw they talk friendly together. Recently, my brother also got married, so we haven't been able to meet often, and I haven't really been in touch.
It's been a while. Is something wrong? Is your husband doing well?
My brother said in the same gentle voice as before. The moment I heard that, I hesitated to say everything to my brother. But I gathered my courage and told him about my husband.
Big brother, I was pregnant. But it didn't work out.
When I said that, my brother took a moment, and then simply said,
I see.
It seemed like my brother was also shocked.
My husband left me in the snow-covered mountains. And when I woke up, the baby was gone.
As I continued to speak, my brother's voice sounded angry.
What?
Then, I recounted all the mistreatment I had endured from my husband. My brother expressed his anger and said,
Why didn't you tell me, with us earlier?
In a sad voice.
I'm sorry.
I apologized, and my brother said,
Everyone is worried about you.
Upon hearing that, I couldn't hold back and cried out. After crying for a while and calming down,
So, in other words, I should help you. Take revenge on that guy, right?
My brother, who is great perceptive, said so.
If possible, I want to make him suffer the same way which he did on me.
When I answered like that, my brother thought for a moment and said,
Then we need some partners.
I could not figure out what was the partners my brother mentioned, but as I listened to the explanation, I understood. The plan my brother and I came up with was to seize the opportunity when my husband slept at night, take him to the snow-covered mountains, and abandon him. We met regularly and worked out for the details of the plan. On the day of execution, my husband had a day off, but he was into mobile game since morning. Even though our child was gone, he seemed to feel nothing at all. Even though it was as if he had done it with his own hands, how could he remain so calm? It felt so foolish that I lived in fear and carried sadness on such a husband. Tonight, I decided to put an end to everything. When night comes, my husband fell asleep on the sofa. Even though he didn't have any alcohol, he snored loudly, sound asleep. I immediately called my brother. He had been waiting nearby our house, and he arrived within 5 minutes. Then, we wrapped up my husband like a mummy. To ensure he couldn't free himself, we had bought plastic tape. After using up all the tape, my brother and I carried my husband into the car and drove away. Today is said to be the coldest day so far, so my brother and I are wearing down jackets, while my husband, who was sleeping in the living room, only has a sweatshirt on. Surely, once he's outside, it will be bitterly cold.
Huh? Where am I?
At that moment, my husband woke up. I glared at him from the passenger seat and said,
"Oh, you're awake,"
in a mocking tone. As soon as my husband saw me, his face turned bright red, and he shouted,
"What the hell are you doing? Are you kidding me?"
He continued to yell, still full of anger.
"Even after losing our child, you still haven't learned your lesson, you useless woman."
Then, my brother spoke up.
"Oh, what are you talking about, my brother? Who says those things, huh?"
My brother called out from the driver's seat. My husband stared at the driver's seat, but as soon as he realized it was my brother, his face turned pale, and he stammered,
"What? Why is my brother-in-law here?"
As soon as my husband realized my brother was there, he completely changed his attitude. In the past, my brother might have been fooled, but that's all over now.
"It's a shame. I thought you would take care of my sister, but it was mistake."
When my brother said that, my husband clearly upset and said,
"No, that's not true. Don't take what she's saying seriously."
But my brother didn't change his attitude.
"Show some remorse,"
he said, and my brother dragged my husband out of the car, at the ski resort where my husband had left me. My husband seemed to understand what was about to happen to him, and he struggled to remove the tape. However, there was no way that plastic tape would come off. Without mercy, my brother dragged my husband all the way to the snowy mountain, and threw him right in the middle of it.
"All right, let's go back."
When my brother said that, as we were about to back to the car, I heard my husband's desperate cry for help.
"Please, Luxury, I was wrong. Please help me."
I turned around and walked towards to my husband, and I stopped right next to him.
"Luxury, you came to save me,"
my husband said, and I smiled.
"Stay here and regret what you did for the rest of your life,"
I said coldly and returned to the car. My husband turned pale and fell silent.
"Was this way the best for your revenge?"
On the way back to home, my brother said that. I couldn't see his face clearly as he was driving, but I noticed he was worried about me.
"Thank you,"
I replied, and my brother smiled happily. We had left my husband behind, but of course, we did not leave him at there. If we continued like this, we would become criminals ourselves. To avoid my husband losing consciousness, we planned to return to place where we left him with the police in 30 minutes. The collaborator who came up in the phone call with my brother was police officers. After explaining the situation to the police in advance, it was acknowledged that my husband's actions towards me were attempted murder, and it became a matter of arrest. So, as soon as we went to pick him up, my husband would be arrested by the police. 30 minutes later, my husband, left behind in the snowy mountains, was trembling uncontrollably. From his purple lips came a pitiful voice saying,
"Please forgive me.
I was about to laugh. The police arrived and protect my husband. And my brother was there as well.
By being left here, did you understand even a little bit how your wife felt?
My brother said, and my husband widened his eyes and cried during he was put into the police car. Thus, my husband was arrested, and I could have freedom. Afterward, we successfully divorced, and I received a large amount of compensation, finally becoming free and independent. A child was born between my brother and his wife, and now I'm helping to take care of that child. Since then, I've become able to clearly express my own opinions and minds more than before. At work, my husband's domestic violence and verbal abuse became a hot topic. And it seemed like there was no place for him in the company anymore. The regret of losing my child on that day is unforgettable. But still, I want to move forward and live my life. By doing so, I feel like I'll eventually be able to see my child again.